It happened on a fall night like any other. Except for one thing. Rodney Fancher is about to take his last breath.
This is a small town. Things like this don't happen here.
The hunt for an unknown killer begins, leaving investigators desperate for clues.
Who's he running with? Who's he dealing with? Is he involved in criminal activity himself?
As the web of the crime slowly begins to untangle, the truth behind the murder is far more disturbing than anyone imagines.
Somebody's going to get hit tonight.
Nashville, Michigan. Population 1,684. A quiet town 2 hours west of Detroit, but one that feels like a lifetime away. Once the record holder for the world's longest ice cream sundae. A town where everyone knows each other, where residents keep their doors unlocked. A town where murders don't happen. 40 minutes east of Lansing, Michigan. 24-year-old Rodney Fancher, on leave from the Army, lives with his mother, Mary. Mother and son reside in the nicest home on Beulah Street, in one of Lansing's toughest neighborhoods. Rodney occupies his days job hunting, tending to his mother, and looking after the house. Yet it isn't all work and no play for Rodney as someone next door catches his eye. Next door to the Fanchers, in a cluttered, shabby house, are the Bouchard family. Matriarch Anna, Anna's youngest daughter, Cora, Cora's two young sons, and, occasionally, Anna's eldest daughter, Peggy, along with her husband, Harold Snake Stevens.
They're next-door neighbors. Fell in love, started dating anyway, and then he had to go do another tour. When he came back, they started getting very serious at that point. So when the opportunity presented himself, Rodney moved in. It was quite a group of people in a very small house, quite frankly.
After the loss of their 14-month-old daughter, Peggy and Harold moved back in, attempting to cope with the tragedy.
Peggy and Harold had been living in Arizona, and they moved back closer to home to be with family after suffering their loss.
Still grieving, Peggy and Harold find solace in Cora's two young children, their nephews, Brian and Brad, with Harold taking an exceptional liking to young Brian. Harold sees Brian as a totem of what could have been. He sees him as another chance to be a father.
Cora had a 6-year-old son and a 2-year-old son, I believe it was, at the time. So Rodney assumed the role as the father there because the father was not around. But before Rodney showed up, Harold Stevens and Peggy Stevens were the ones that kind of looked after young Brian and developed a real good relationship with him. That's where the problem began.
Cora's $500 a month child payments and her part-time job with the National Guard go towards the bills for the little house on Beulah Street. As Anna, Peggy, and Harold are all on welfare. But after months of living in tight quarters, and with Rodney finding the odd job here and there, the young couple decide it's time to move out. Rodney is always on the hunt for work. So when a call comes from a man named Rich Hoover, looking for someone to help him unload a truck, he jumps at the chance. Rodney asks Hoover where he found his name and phone number. Hoover tells him that it was posted on a work wanted bulletin board at a truck stop in the city. Rodney asks the Bouchards if they know anything about his name up at the truck stop. And Anna says she and Peggy put it there to help him out. Rodney's not thrilled with the actions of his in-laws, but is grateful for the chance to prove himself. With tensions running high in the household, Peggy and Harold plan a trip to Bay City, Michigan, an hour and a half north of Lansing, to visit a friend and to take on a job of their own, delivering a trailer down to Florida. Though employed in the Eaton Intermediate School District, Harold has issues holding down employment, so a quick job comes as a relief to him and Peggy. On the night of October 3rd, 1985, Rodney leaves the Bouchard home in Lansing, says goodbye to his mother, and meets Hoover at a bar in Potterville, Michigan, 20 minutes outside the city.
That's the last time anyone sees Rodney Fancher alive.
Rodney pulls into the bar's quiet parking lot, spotting Hoover's truck under a burnt-out lamppost, tucked away from the other vehicles. Rodney carefully approaches, peering into the shadows within. A hand emerges from the darkness, beckoning Rodney inside. Hoover lures Rodney with the promise of $80 for one evening's work to help unload a truck. Rodney doesn't know where the truck is, only that Hoover insists that they take one vehicle and leave Rodney's behind. Rodney engages Hoover as they drive, discussing the job and wages. Rodney tells Hoover about his family, about Cora, Brian, and Brad. He tells the man how grateful he is for the work, and that he's been saving up to rent an apartment with his fiancée. A place that they can start fresh, a place to call their own. The two men drive on, finding themselves in Nashville, Michigan, as the evening descends. Rodney becomes uneasy and asks Hoover if they're approaching the truck. Hoover says nothing. Hoover brings the truck to a stop down a deserted gravel road, then asks Rodney for his help moving something in the back. Rodney Fancher, the 24-year-old father of two, steps out into the night at the bequest of Rich Hoover, unaware of the fate that awaits him. But why did Rich Hoover shoot Rodney?
For whoever did this to Rodney, it was up close and personal. After they kill him, they roll his body into a ditch and leave him there like a piece of roadside trash.
Nashville, Michigan, a quiet town of over 5.6 square kilometers, with a population of 1,500. Nashville is quintessential small-town America, from its rolling farmlands to its many back roads. But on the night of October 3rd, 1985, everything changes when Rodney Fancher is murdered in cold blood.
The Fanchers and the Bouchards lived in Lansing, Michigan. But 𝗂𝗶𝗶𝗶𝗿, you know, they never have anything like this going out there, and that, all of a sudden it's on the map. You know, this is where the abduction, if you will, took place. It probably wasn't an abduction at gunpoint, because actually what happened was Fancher got in a car voluntarily, expecting to go unload a truck, so they don't really have an abduction anyway, but the whole thing was put into the beginning was there in 𝗂𝗶𝗶𝗶𝗿. So, you know, it's a small community, so that's like all of a sudden they're part of this action. And then you've got Nashville, like 25 miles down the road, where Fancher's body was found, so all of a sudden they're like, wow. People in the rural counties that we're speaking of, Berry County in this case, Michigan, and Eaton County, and it's impactful on them. That's big news. That's the discussion in the coffee shops and the bars and that type of thing.
On the outskirts of Nashville, where miles separate the nearest neighbors, a local farmer notices something strange. He approaches the site, thinking he's uncovered an injured animal. Instead, he stumbles upon the discarded body of Rodney Fancher.
A civilian found the body laying in the woods next to a road. The sheriff's department was called out, handled the scene that day, and through their checking, they learned about the 𝗂𝗂𝗶𝗶𝗶𝗿, and then involved our department at that time. So we initially had like 4 departments working on this case: Eaton County Sheriff's Department, the Berry County Sheriff's Department, 𝗂𝗶𝗶𝗶𝗏 Police, and the State Police at the Lansing Post. I was not at the scene. I do know from the report, or from the memory, that he was murdered. The ME determined within 24 hours.
The quiet town is now abuzz with the news of Fancher's murder. But the small police force is ill-prepared for a case like this. Still, investigators flock to the scene, quickly taking note of what appears to be the possible cause of death: a point-blank shotgun wound to Rodney's chest.
Unfortunately, his body was already in an advanced state of decomposition within that short 24-hour time period. He was in a ditch with outside elements such as rain, wind, heat, and those factors of the environment will increase the process of a decomposition. And within a 24-hour period, you can get like a black, blue, bloated, and very discolored face and body that are actually unrecognizable. So the importance of using other terms like his identifier of his fly tattoo, that is very unique and on a specific part of his body that a loved one can view, will help in determining that it is a positive identification.
Investigators also determine there are no signs of a struggle. Rodney's body doesn't appear to have any defensive wounds. Upon searching his remains, it's discovered that Rodney still has his keys and wallet in his possession. It becomes very clear quickly that this is not a robbery gone wrong. No, this is intentional. Meanwhile, at the Bouchard house, Cora is seeking answers. Rodney has yet to return home from the night before. Aware that he's made arrangements to meet with Hoover at the bar in 𝗂𝗂𝗶𝗶𝗏, Cora takes matters into her own hands. She calls the bar, hopeful that Rodney is there, that maybe he overdrank and did the responsible thing by sleeping in his truck. The bartender tells Cora that there's a similar-looking truck in the parking lot, but they're unsure if anyone's in it. That's all Cora needs to hear. She hangs up and dials the police, wishing for the best, but preparing for the worst. Police rush to the bar where they find the truck. Investigators make a note of the license plate and radio it in. Dispatch quickly confirms the truck belongs to Rodney. With this discovery, Cora's worst fears come true.
It does not appear to be robbery. Okay, he's targeted. Who wants to target him? So you start performing what we call victimology, doing a background on Rodney in this case to determine who's he running with, who's he dealing with, is he involved in criminal activity himself? Has he been seeing someone else's wife? You got to go that route basically and start identifying possible suspects.
With his body in decomposition, investigators show Cora the one identifiable piece left of Rodney. When Cora sees his housefly tattoo, the world crumbles around her. Investigators speak with Cora, who's still in shock from the murder of her fiancé. She tells them that she has no idea who could have done such a thing to Rodney, that he's a good man with a good heart. He has no enemies that she knows of. Police then speak with Anna Bouchard, who tells them that a man named Rich Hoover hired Rodney for a quick job unloading a truck, and that Hoover got Rodney's information from a work-wanted bulletin board at a truck stop in South Lansing.
The day he left with his killer at the 𝗂𝗶𝗿𝗶𝗍𝗶 bar, he came from his work job to his mother's house where he showered up and then took off to the 𝗂𝗶𝗶𝗍𝗶 bar to meet the person who eventually killed him.
Cora confirms her mother's story, but tells investigators that Rodney isn't the one who placed his information there. Anna Bouchard and Peggy Stevens did. When the call comes from Rich Hoover looking to pay Rodney for an honest day's work, the young father of two jumps at the opportunity. But little does he know, it will be the last job he ever takes.
At that point, we have a name, Rich Hoover, the trucker supposedly used. So we're trying to run down some information on Rich Hoover, checking at the truck stop with Rodney Fancher's picture, asking employees, asking truckers, asking mechanics, things like this. Anybody know Rich Hoover? Anybody seen this guy here?
But nobody has seen Rodney or knows anyone named Rich Hoover.
Because no one observed Rodney Fancher at that truck stop posting a notice that he wanted work. Nobody observed anybody at that truck stop making that post. Nobody knew the name Rich Hoover. Didn't mean for sure that everything went down as it initially appeared to be, and that being that, his name was up there.
The only suspect police have is a person by the name of Rich Hoover, but without any description of what he looks like or a location for him, they really have nothing else to work with.
As the investigation ramps up, the search to find the mysterious Rich Hoover begins. But several questions remain. Who is Rich Hoover? And what role does he play in Rodney Fancher's murder? "24-year-old Rodney Fancher has been murdered, and police are on the hunt for a man named Rich Hoover, with whom Rodney had been traveling to a job site. A crime scene with a severe lack of evidence leads investigators from the Michigan State Police, Eaton and Barry County Sheriff's Departments, and the Potterville Police to join together to help bring a murderer to justice. Police circulate Rodney's photo to employees and patrons of the bar in Potterville, where he was last seen. Truck drivers and restaurant workers at the truck stop where Rich Hoover allegedly retrieved Rodney's information. But no one recognizes Rodney, and no one knows who Rich Hoover is.
We see a lot of situations where strangers are perpetrating a crime, but more often than not, it's somebody who knows the victim, Maybe they don't know them directly, but indirectly they do. They're down the street, or they're related, or they're in business where there's some kind of connection to the victim. It's not random.
Rodney's mother, Mary, tells police that her son is a good man, that he's been trying to secure a stable life for him and his family. She believes the murder wasn't random. She believes it was a setup, a grudge job. But who holds a grudge deep enough against Rodney to want him dead? Investigators press Rodney's girlfriend, Cora, on Mary's statement. Cora mentions that Rodney and her brother-in-law, Harold Stevens, did not get along, but doesn't believe he or anyone in her family is capable of committing murder. Police speak with Peggy and Harold Stevens. The couple went out of town the night of the murder, and their alibi is confirmed by their friend, James Oswald, whom they stayed with in Bay City, Michigan, before taking on a job delivering a trailer down to Florida.
Sure, they have an alibi. They just happened to be out of town in the days leading up to the murder. The timing of this all seems just a little too convenient, given the history between Rodney and Harold.
Police search for a break in the case. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months. With a lack of witnesses and evidence, the case turns cold.
One of the most difficult things for an investigator at this point is the feeling that you're potentially letting the family of the victim down. They just want closure.
A lot of times you're waiting on information that you want to get before you take the next step. You want to maybe conduct an interview with somebody, but really you want to get some information before you talk to them. You want to have all your ducks in line. And so when you apply for that information, either in the form of a search warrant or you're waiting for someone else to step forward and give you some information, somebody specific, well, you don't want to go to B before you've dealt with A. Sometimes it gets dragged down a little bit. In this case here, we had no information that is tied with any other homicides. It really looked like Rodney was targeted. And if you're being targeted, it's because generally somebody knows you. And I don't think we really figured at that time it was a hitman involved, because you don't see that much. TV all the time, you know, but you don't see that many times a hitman, or maybe in the drug culture, the drug world, you know, you do. But not in Lansing, Michigan, or Charlotte and Nashville and all these places. Hitman, no, you don't do that. So you think mainly it's going to be somebody that knows him, but he's gotten involved in something else and he's ripped somebody else off or something like that.
Investigators go back to the drawing board and examine the facts. Though he has no more than an 8th grade education and constantly struggles to hold down a steady job, Rodney promises Cora that he'll take care of her, that he'll give her and her 2 sons a better life, no matter what the cost. But Harold sees himself as a father figure to Brian and Brad, and decides there's no room in the boy's life for one more. Tensions are high in the small house, mainly between Rodney and Harold. Harold Stevens wants nothing more than to be a father to Cora's young sons, to have a chance at redemption, to be the father he believes he's destined to be. But when Rodney enters the picture, Harold's fantasy slowly begins to crack. Living off Cora's part-time salary and her $500 child welfare checks is enough for Rodney and Cora to begin searching for a home of their own. Somewhere far away from the crowded house on Beulah Street. But the tension between Rodney and Harold isn't the only one about to boil over in the small house. Anna learns that Cora and Rodney are planning on moving out, and Anna doesn't want her daughter going anywhere.
Anna Bouchard became aware that Cora and Rodney Fancher were out apartment shopping. So at that point, Anna realized, I'm not real happy with my future son-in-law, Fancher, anyway. I've got my daughter, Peggy, and son-in-law, Harold, who definitely don't like him. And if Cora and Fancher move out to another apartment, there's a great loss of income.
Police question the Stevenses, who confirm the bad blood between Rodney and Harold, yet maintain their innocence. They're not killers. They reiterate their alibi. They visited a friend in Bay City the night of Rodney's murder. Then they traveled to Florida, taking on a job of delivering a trailer. Even though the Stevenses have an alibi, do they know more about Rodney's murder than they've let on? Or is Rodney's murder a case of a job gone wrong? Could a dispute about wages have sent Rodney to his grave? With all the facts that have come to light, two possible theories emerge. Scenario number 1. Rich Hoover, a hot-tempered man with a no-nonsense attitude, takes advantage of low-skilled workers looking for odd jobs, lowballing their worth for strenuous tasks. Hoover calls Rodney looking for a one-time job to help him unload a truck. They arrange to meet in the bar parking lot of a 𝗶𝗶𝗶𝗿 bar, with Hoover paying Rodney $80 for his services. Rodney agrees, then hangs up. He questions the fact that Hoover says he got his information from a truck stop bulletin board, which he didn't do. Anna admits she and Peggy did it to help Rodney out. Though he's upset with his in-laws, Rodney's excited at the prospect of earning his keep. Rodney meets Hoover at the bar the night of October 3rd, 1985. From there, the two men pile into Hoover's truck to head to the job site, leaving Rodney's vehicle behind. Rodney voices his concerns about the distance they've traveled and how long the job will take. He lets Hoover know that he expects to be paid more for his time. Hoover tells Rodney he won't pay him more than the agreed-upon amount, which causes the men to argue, with Hoover pulling over onto the side of the road in a rage. Perhaps Hoover exits the truck to cool down. Rodney watches from inside, unsure how to proceed. He decides to go talk to Hoover to calm the seas, but hot-headed Rich Hoover is waiting for Rodney when he steps out. He shoots Rodney in the chest at close range, killing him instantly. He then drags Rodney's lifeless body into the ditch, leaving him for nature to consume. Or is it, in fact, the second possible scenario? Is Rich Hoover nothing more than an alias? A man invented to throw investigators off the scent of the true murderer? Peggy and Harold Stevens have an alibi for the night of Rodney's murder. But given the toxic relationship between them and the Stevens' desire to be like parents towards Cora's children, did Peggy and Harold hire someone to kill Rodney? Is it possible the Stevenses want Brian all to themselves, so they recruit a hitman to murder Rodney? Did they meet at a bar in 𝗶𝗶𝗶𝗿 and devise a plan? The hitman calls Rodney, pretending to be Rich Hoover, asking Rodney to help him with a job. The Stevenses know Rodney's situation. They count on him to accept the offer, and he does, sealing his fate.
Well, Rodney and Cora seem to have their future mapped out for them. They plan to move out together and live as a family.
Rodney meets with who he believes is Rich Hoover at the bar in 𝗶𝗶𝗶𝗿. From there, the two men pile into the truck and head to the job site. As Rodney and the unidentified man drive, the man grabs a joint and begins to smoke, offering some to Rodney, who gladly accepts. Did the driver stop his truck on a deserted gravel road, telling Rodney he needs to grab more weed from the back? But there is no pot, only a sawed-off shotgun. The man eyes the gun, then calls out for Rodney's help. And when Rodney exits the vehicle, he's greeted by his killer, pointing a sawed-off shotgun square at his chest. But if this is how the crime occurs, who is the unidentified man that the Stevens has hired? The 24-year-old stepfather of two, Rodney Fancher, has been murdered. But with limited evidence, no witnesses, and a suspect that can't be traced, the investigation is at a standstill. After months of searching and hundreds of unanswered questions, a surprising witness comes forth with some damning evidence, giving investigators the break they've been searching for.
The Stevensons take a trip to Bay City the day before Rodney's murder and stay with their friend James Oswald. It was only when James Oswald phoned the police and provided that tip that everything fell into place.
James breaks down Peggy and Harold's visit. He and the Stevenses go to a nearby bar the night of Rodney's murder, where Harold acts strangely. Not soon after, Harold begins talking about an unnamed child abuser, one who's about to get picked up, bumped off, snuffed out.
We learn that there's a man named Jim Oswald, and Harold Stevens, he says to his friend, let's go to a bar where you are known and that we can sit around and establish an alibi here because somebody's going to get hit tonight. A child abuser's going to get hit tonight.
Harold Stevens proposes a toast to the death of the abuser at exactly 8:30 p.m. on the night of the murder. He makes sure to point out the time to James Oswald, and James notes this as being somewhat strange.
Cora denies that Rodney ever laid a finger on the children. James also mentions to police that he spoke with the Stevenses upon their return from Florida, when Harold came to purchase James's old motorcycle. When James tells Harold about the news of Rodney's passing, Harold tells James he expects the investigation to be a short one.
And they made some incriminating statements to Oswald at that point.
Yet, even with this new information, the question remains, if the Stevenses did in fact orchestrate Rodney's murder, then who did they hire to pull the trigger? While searching for the trigger man, police catch a lucky break when they pull the phone records of the Bushards and find several calls from an unidentified number that match the time when the supposed Rich Hoover rang. After some digging, investigators discover that the phone number is that of Tony Hill, an old friend and current co-worker of none other than Harold Stevens. Tony Hill, a janitor living in Charlotte, Michigan, is brought in for questioning. He tells investigators that Harold often discussed his troubles with Rodney, but that his friend isn't capable of murder, For his alibi, he claims to have been at home the night of October 3rd, watching television. But with no one else to back up his claim and his intimate knowledge of Harold Stevens' vendetta against Rodney, police keep Tony as one of their top suspects. James Oswald then reveals that he sold his motorcycle to Harold, who then passed it on to Tony as a down payment for the murder. But the biggest break yet comes from Peggy Stevens herself. She tells investigators everything in exchange for immunity.
Peggy Stevens is an eyewitness to this crime, which is a crucial piece of evidence to the prosecution. And so that's why, in a situation like this, where there's not a lot of other evidence linking the accused individuals, the police and the prosecution may be willing to cut a deal and offer someone immunity in exchange for that information.
Peggy's chain of events paint a horrifying picture as the case goes to trial. But nothing could prepare anyone for the truth. The Stevenses, still reeling over the loss of their 14-month-old daughter, take a special liking to Cora's eldest son, Brian, particularly Harold, who sees himself as a father figure to the boy. But all that changes when Rodney comes into the picture.
To them, Brian is like, it's my kid now because I'm helping raise them, and we got a special relationship. And now this clown's coming in here and telling me we're no longer going to get to see him, and we got rules we got to live by. You can get an idea maybe how much hatred had developed between them.
Harold feels that Rodney is trying to remove him from Brian's life. So Harold does everything within his power to make Rodney suffer, even claiming Rodney abuses the children, something Cora denies. When that doesn't work, the Stevenses opt to send Rodney a more serious message. At first, they discuss beating him up, but then decide they need to do something a little more permanent. Harold, who recently found work in the Eaton Intermediate School Division with his friend, vents his frustrations to Tony, eventually convincing his friend to murder Rodney for $1,000. Knowing Rodney is desperate for work, Tony calls the Bouchard house, pretending to be Rich Hoover, an alias created by him and the Stevenses. From there, the plot to end Rodney Fancher's life is set into motion. Tony allegedly purchases a shotgun, which is later retrieved by the investigators. The autopsy reveals that the plastic from Tony Hill's shotgun lodged itself into Rodney's chest. Police believe the case is solved. The Stevenses and Tony Hill are behind Rodney's murder. Both Stevens and Hill are arrested in late December 1985, almost 3 months after the crime's been committed. But soon after Peggy's first confession, she reveals a final accusation that changes everything. On a gravel road just outside of Nashville, Michigan, Tony Hill stops his truck, telling Rodney Fancher he needs to grab more weed from the back. While outside, Tony calls out for Rodney's help. But before Rodney realizes what's going on, he finds himself face to face with Tony Hill, a shotgun pointed square at his chest. Then, according to Peggy, Tony mutters the last words Rodney will ever hear.
Tony Hill tells Rodney, "This is for the way you treated Brian. This is the way Grandma wants things done."
Tony Hill, Peggy Stevens and Harold Stevens are merely just puppets on a string in an elaborate plot put into motion by none other than Cora's mother, Anna Bouchard. With Peggy's testimony and the recovery of the murder weapon, it's enough to put Harold, Tony, and Anna away. All three receive life sentences for first-degree murder and conspiracy, with Anna and Tony both receiving an additional 30 to 60 years on the conspiracy charge. But there's still one more surprise in store. A mistrial during Anna's court appearance threatens the very fabric of the case.
An appellate court concludes that the circuit court judge erred by not allowing prior testimony to be read back to the jury in Anna's case, and that this could have potentially affected her right to due process. So Anna's conviction is overturned, and she's granted a second trial at which he can again argue that the prosecution has not proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt.
However, an unlikely witness takes the stand during Anna's retrial, her cellmate, Rhonda Howlett. Howlett tells the court that Anna confessed to everything during their stay in prison. She corroborates Peggy's version of the events down to a T. Anna Bouchard is hopeful that her second trial will change her life sentence, and her wish comes true, for the most part. Bouchard receives 2 life sentences instead of 1. Cora Bouchard claims Anna called her after her second trial, but not to ask forgiveness about her daughter and grandchildren, but rather about the little house on Beulah Street, a house once bursting at the seams with the laughter of children, now quiet and cold and empty. Rodney Fancher was a man with his whole life ahead of him, who wanted nothing more than to be a father and provide for his family. And a small town, 2 hours west of Detroit, one where things like this don't happen.
It has been processed normally. It has been processed normally.